Iran just named Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia as its next victims. Iran just named Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia as its next victims. Not missile bases, not airfields, not naval fleets, but the companies that quietly power the modern digital world. The companies whose servers run global banking, whose chips power artificial intelligence, whose cloud networks sit underneath military communications and global logistics. Yesterday, a list appeared. 6 names. Names that together represent more economic power than the GDP of most countries. And according to that list, their offices, their data centers, their digital infrastructure across the Gulf are now considered targets. But here is the question almost nobody is asking. If the buildings that run the global digital economy suddenly become part of the battlefield, what happens to the markets, to the investors, and to the entire financial system built around them? Because once a war reaches the server rooms of the companies that power the global economy, it rarely stays contained, and what may come next could reshape far more than a single conflict. It could reshape the rules of economic power itself, but to understand why, we must first understand what really happened when those names appeared on that list. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Warfront Global. Here we do not chase headlines. We study the deeper forces shaping the modern world. If you appreciate calm analysis instead of noise, consider subscribing to the channel, especially if you are someone who has spent decades watching how the world changes, someone who understands that history often moves slowly until suddenly it moves very fast. And before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because this conversation now involves the entire world. The announcement did not arrive with dramatic speeches or emergency broadcasts. It appeared quietly through media channels linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, but the content of the message quickly captured global attention. The document did not list air bases, naval fleets, or missile launch sites. Instead, the names on the list belonged to technology companies. Among them were Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia. At first glance, these companies appear to belong to the world of commerce rather than conflict. Search engines, office software, cloud services, and artificial intelligence chips seem far removed from traditional battlefields. Yet, in the modern strategic environment, they represent something far more significant. They represent infrastructure. The infrastructure that quietly powers global communication, financial transactions, logistics systems, and increasingly military coordination. Over the past decade, many Gulf countries have invested billions of dollars to become centers of digital infrastructure. Cities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi host regional headquarters and massive data centers designed to serve markets across the Middle East and beyond. These facilities process enormous volumes of information every second. Banking systems rely on them. Airlines rely on them. Government agencies rely on them. Entire economic ecosystems operate through servers located inside these buildings. For years, the assumption behind this expansion was simple. Commercial infrastructure would remain outside the battlefield, but the appearance of that list suggested that this assumption might be changing. Because if the digital backbone of the global economy becomes strategically important in modern conflict, then the companies operating that infrastructure may no longer be viewed purely as neutral businesses. They may instead be seen as part of a much larger strategic ecosystem. And that possibility introduces a new question, one that governments, investors, and corporate leaders are now quietly asking. If the digital infrastructure of the modern economy becomes a strategic target, who exactly can protect it? When the digital economy becomes part of the battlefield. For most of modern history, the most valuable targets in wartime were easy to identify. They were factories that produced weapons, oil refineries that powered armies, railways that transported troops, and ports that supplied entire fleets. But the structure of power has changed. In the 21st century, many of the systems that support national security are no longer located inside military bases. They exist inside commercial infrastructure, office buildings, server farms, and technology campuses operated by private companies. That transformation is at the center of the warning that emerged when the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps released its list. To understand the logic behind it, analysts began examining how deeply modern military operations depend on technology companies. What they found surprised many observers. Companies such as Microsoft and Google are not simply providers of consumer software. Their cloud computing systems now support massive data processing networks used by governments, intelligence agencies, and defense institutions. Cloud platforms host secure communication systems. They store satellite imagery. They process logistics information. And they allow large organizations to coordinate complex operations across multiple regions simultaneously. These capabilities are not optional in modern warfare. They are essential. Military commanders now depend on computing systems that can process enormous amounts of information in real time. Data from satellites, drones, surveillance systems, and intelligence networks must be analyzed almost instantly. Without that computing power, decision-making slows dramatically, This is where companies like Nvidia enter the picture. Nvidia designs the advanced processors that power many artificial intelligence systems. These chips allow computers to analyze satellite images, track movement patterns, and identify objects across massive data sets. Artificial intelligence can scan thousands of images in seconds. It can detect missile launch sites, vehicle movements, or unusual activity patterns that human analysts might miss. This technology is widely used in civilian industries, but it is also increasingly important for national security. The same processors used to train AI models for self-driving cars can also power systems that analyze battlefield information. And this dual-use nature of technology is precisely where the strategic tension emerges. From a business perspective, technology companies operate globally. They provide cloud services, software tools, and computing infrastructure to customers in many industries. From a military perspective, those same tools can support intelligence analysis, logistics coordination, and operational planning. This overlap creates a complicated reality. A data center that hosts banking applications during the day might also process secure government data at night. A cloud network that powers retail companies might also support military communication systems. And an artificial intelligence processor designed for research laboratories may also help analyze surveillance images collected by reconnaissance aircraft. None of these activities necessarily transform a company into a military institution, but they do create connections between the private technology sector and national security systems. Those connections are now being examined more closely than ever before. In Washington, defense planners increasingly view commercial technology companies as strategic partners in maintaining technological advantage. In Tehran, the same companies may be viewed very differently. They may be seen as part of a technological ecosystem that enables the capabilities of rival states. That difference in perception is critical, because once infrastructure is interpreted as strategically significant, it begins to move closer to the logic of conflict. And this is where geography begins to matter again. Many of the facilities operated by these companies are located in regions that were once considered politically stable technology hubs. Cities such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi host large cloud campuses and regional headquarters designed to serve markets across the Middle East, Africa, and South Asia. These facilities were built under a simple assumption that commercial infrastructure would remain outside the direct reach of military conflict. But if that assumption begins to weaken, the implications extend far beyond the companies themselves. Because the modern digital economy depends on the belief that data infrastructure can operate safely across borders. If that belief begins to erode, then the consequences could reach every market connected to the global technology system. And that brings us to the next critical issue, not the military logic of targeting infrastructure, but the economic logic behind it. The economics of modern conflict wars are often analyzed through the lens of military strength, numbers of aircraft, missiles, and soldiers. But beneath every conflict lies another calculation that is rarely discussed in public briefings: the economic equation. For centuries, powerful nations assumed that superior resources guaranteed victory. Larger economies could build more ships, manufacture more weapons, and sustain longer campaigns. Yet modern conflicts increasingly reveal a different reality. Sometimes the decisive factor is not the strength of the defender, it is the cost of defending. This principle becomes especially clear when analysts examine the economic structure of modern infrastructure warfare. Protecting a military base is expensive but manageable. Governments build hardened facilities, deploy defensive systems, and maintain controlled security perimeters. Protecting commercial infrastructure is far more complicated. Technology campuses, data centers, and corporate offices are designed for accessibility and connectivity. They are located inside major cities, close to communication networks, transportation routes, and business districts. Their purpose is efficiency, not defense. When facilities like these suddenly become potential targets, the cost of protection increases dramatically. Security experts often describe the situation using a simple comparison. It may cost only a small amount to launch a drone or a basic missile, but defending against that threat requires radar coverage, interceptor systems, trained personnel, and constant monitoring. Each defensive layer adds cost, and the defender must succeed every time. The attacker only needs to succeed once. This imbalance is known in security circles as cost asymmetry. It explains why infrastructure disruptions can occur even when the defending side possesses far greater resources. Consider the scale of the companies involved. Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia represent enormous portions of global technology markets. Their combined market valuations measure in the trillions of dollars. Their operations extend across continents. Their infrastructure supports banking systems, logistics networks, artificial intelligence research, and communication platforms used by millions of organizations. Yet despite this scale, many of their physical assets remain surprisingly vulnerable. A modern hyperscale data center contains thousands of servers performing continuous computations. It requires stable electricity, cooling systems, and high-speed fiber connections. Disrupt any one of those elements and operations can slow or stop. This vulnerability does not mean such facilities are poorly designed. In fact, many are built with redundant systems and advanced security protections. But they were not originally designed to operate in active war zones. That distinction matters, because financial markets react not only to events that occur, but also to risks that suddenly become visible. If investors begin to believe that critical infrastructure is exposed to new forms of geopolitical risk, markets adjust rapidly. Share prices can move within minutes. Investment flows can shift across regions. Insurance costs for infrastructure projects can rise dramatically. In other words, the economic consequences of a threat may begin long before any physical damage occurs. This dynamic introduces a powerful strategic lever. If a government can convince investors that certain infrastructure has become dangerous or unstable, the financial response may occur automatically. Capital seeks safety, and when safety becomes uncertain, markets react with remarkable speed. This is why analysts are watching the situation closely. Because the real impact of modern infrastructure warfare may not come from the destruction of buildings. It may come from the financial ripple effects that spread through global markets. And those ripple effects could reach far beyond the immediate conflict. They could influence where companies invest, where governments build infrastructure, and which regions emerge as the next centers of technological power. The strategic message to the world. By the 13th day of the conflict, analysts across financial institutions, government agencies, and multinational corporations were no longer asking whether the situation was unusual. They were asking what message it was meant to send, because wars are never fought only with weapons. They are also fought with signals. And the signal contained in the list published by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. At first glance, the list appeared to focus on American technology companies. Among those named were Google, Microsoft, and Nvidia. Corporations that collectively form a large portion of the digital infrastructure supporting the global economy. But strategic observers noticed something equally important. Many other technology companies operating in the same region were not mentioned. The omission raised questions about the broader geopolitical message behind the announcement. For the past decade, the Gulf region has become one of the most important arenas in the global competition for technological influence. Countries across the region have invested heavily in artificial intelligence research, cloud computing infrastructure, and advanced semiconductor partnerships. Cities such as Dubai and Abu Dhabi have positioned themselves as global hubs, where international technology companies can establish data centers and regional headquarters. The strategy has been clear. Attract investment from multiple technological ecosystems. Maintain economic partnerships with Western companies while also developing relationships with Asian technology firms. This balancing approach allowed Gulf governments to benefit from both sides of the global technology race. But the appearance of the target list suggested that maintaining this balance may become increasingly difficult. If digital infrastructure becomes intertwined with geopolitical rivalry, companies and governments may eventually be forced to make clearer strategic choices. Technology supply chains are already experiencing this pressure. Semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence research, and cloud computing services are increasingly linked to national security concerns. Export controls, technology restrictions, and investment regulations have already reshaped parts of the global technology industry. Now, the question is whether physical infrastructure will also become part of this strategic competition, because once commercial facilities begin to appear on military target lists, the economic environment surrounding them changes dramatically. Investors reconsider risk. Insurance providers reassess exposure. Governments review the security of critical infrastructure. And companies begin to evaluate where future projects should be located. These decisions may unfold quietly, without dramatic headlines, but over time they can reshape the global technology landscape. If regions once considered safe hubs for digital infrastructure suddenly appear vulnerable to geopolitical tension, investment flows may shift elsewhere. New technology corridors may emerge in different parts of the world. Existing partnerships may evolve, and the architecture of the global digital economy may gradually adjust to a new strategic reality. For business leaders and entrepreneurs, the lesson is clear. Technology no longer operates in isolation from geopolitics. Cloud computing platforms, artificial intelligence processors, and data infrastructure now sit at the intersection of economic growth and strategic competition. Understanding this intersection has become essential for anyone involved in global markets. Because the decisions made today about investment, infrastructure, and technological alliances will shape the economic map of the next decade. And the list that appeared during this conflict may ultimately be remembered not only as a wartime declaration, but as an early signal of a much larger transformation. A transformation in which the buildings that store the world's data and the companies that operate them have become part of the strategic terrain of global power.